stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting. Whether we're sharing business stories or personal stories, how we share them makes a difference in how we remember them and in how we're being perceived by the people we're sharing them with. Think about a story someone recently told you. What did that story say about the person sharing it? Did it demonstrate a different aspect of their character than you were expecting? How we choose to share a story, those details about the characters, our body language, our facial expression, and tone of voice, all contribute to the perception our audience will have of us afterward, and in our internal messages. If you're ready to explore your own stories and find your patterns and pivot points, I can help. My book will be available for pre-order on August 1st, because your story isn't a timeline of experiences. Your story is each individual incident, conversation, and event that made an impact on how you think and how you see the world. This book will help you identify those incidents and help you create a story portfolio to refer to as you choose which personal stories and how to tell them. And when you can look back at that portfolio and find patterns in your life, you can address many of those internal messages and communication challenges that are limiting your success at work and in your relationships. Visit my pre-order site on publishizer.com, click on Proposals, and search for Sarah Elkins or Your Stories Don't Define You, or visit my website, elkinsconsulting.com, to learn more. Today's guest on my podcast, Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will, is a woman named Lisa Cummings that I met through LinkedIn. And I'm really eager to talk to her today because she is the first strengths coach that I've interviewed on this podcast. And I'm excited to hear her perspective of this tool that I've been using for about a year now, because she's been using it a lot longer. So thank you for joining me, Lisa.
You're welcome. It'll be fun to be here.
I love these interviews because I learned so much about each individual, and our listeners seem to really appreciate starting with this question, which is, can you please share something about yourself that most people don't know about you, that we wouldn't see on your resume or your bio? And the reason I ask this question is to give our audience a little bit of context for who you are before we start digging into these personal stories.
The one thing that pops in mind is that I am that person when you go to a play or a big Broadway show or something like that, and they pull someone out of the audience, I think that I have some sort of magnet to be that person. So I actually went up on Cirque du Soleil because I think it's the face. I'm so into it. They're probably looking for someone with that crazy big smile going, yeah, 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 this is the best. So I was on stage with Cirque du Soleil, and I thought that was the greatest because in a secret life, I want to be a trapeze artist, except I'm in my mid-40s. So, you don't start that at this time. And at one point, it happened to me in Ireland. I went to see this Celtic dancing. It kind of is like seeing Stomp on Broadway, except live in the backwoods of Ireland. It was the coolest thing. And they did this same thing. They pulled someone up out of the audience. So I'm up there clogging and dancing and moving around. And there's a magnet in me for that. So that would be one of those things. I would never write that anywhere. I don't think people know that about me.
That is perfect. Oh my gosh. I love that. That just cracks me up because there are people who just, they attract that kind of attention. And I think you're right. I think it's you are so full of expressive, your face is very expressive. And it was part of what I liked as soon as I saw your activity on LinkedIn and I saw your profile picture and I saw, I do a little digging because that's what I do before I have a podcast guest. And I knew right away that you were one of those people that could be as enthusiastic about something as I am, which I don't see that in everybody. So that's really cool.
Maybe that's why. Maybe I'm making that face like, ooh, pick me. I'll have fun up there.
Yes. You would be great on The Price is Right. you should go try to be on one of those shows and maybe win some money or stuff. I love that. That is a totally unique thing. Nobody else has ever said that in the 80 episodes I've recorded of this podcast. So.
I don't think I've ever given that fun fact of all the weird things about me I could share.
I love it. So that actually leads right into what we're talking about today, which is strengths and becoming a coach and kind of what that entails and what happened. So before we get started into that, I have to ask, is woo in your top 10 strengths?
It is number 5. Yeah.
There we go. Of course it is. Of course it is. So for our listeners, woo is winning others over. And this is somebody who's generally charming, someone who, if they go into a networking event of 50 people, they leave with 50 business cards. They know a little bit about everybody, and everyone knows somebody with woo in their top strengths. So, yeah, not surprised. So tell me a little bit about your coaching practice and what you do.
So I focus primarily on StrengthsFinder or Clifton Strengths, and our specialty is actually virtual training delivery for corporate. I do also a decent amount of in-person training and speeches, but our real sweet spot and unique area that I don't know of anyone else who does this, we just really focus on the teams that are global and they're spread all over the world and they never see each other in person and they want a way to bring themselves together. So I've found this space of virtual training and StrengthsFinder and how they live really nicely together.
That is terrific. That I didn't realize that about your business. And it makes so much sense as our teams become more and more virtual. So that's great. I'm going to have to ask you more about that later, like offline, because I'm fascinated by it. I just did a workshop yesterday for a virtual team that were coming together for a retreat. So that what you just said really resonates with me, and how that kind of works for people, so that you make sure that you're recognizing the language that people are speaking, whether it's written in a message or whether you're talking on the phone or doing a Zoom conversation. That just makes so much sense. So thank you.
Yeah,
Wow.
absolutely. And a lot of times it'll start. I did one yesterday as well that was in person, but people are flying in from Singapore all the way to Austin, Texas, and they come so far and they say, oh gosh, I want to roll this out to my whole team, but we have people in 30 countries. It would be so expensive just from a travel and expense standpoint. It makes it undoable. So that's how I originally stumbled over the virtual training stuff, is that it was a barrier to people rolling it out to their teams. And
Right.
Now we can do a lot of kickoff events where a certain group of people come together, and then the rest of the team, instead of getting ignored out there in Malaysia, they actually get the training and the experience and the connection that they otherwise wouldn't have.
Yes, which is the key, I think, to this particular assessment, is building those connections. And I have to tell you that I was such a skeptic when I started this process. It's kind of like, is this going to be another cult? Is it a multi-level marketing? I mean, what is this going to be? And mostly because I generally don't like assessments. I find them to be self-limiting and labels. And I've always had trouble with that, generalizing people. And one of the things that you'll hear in my podcast a lot and all my writing is generalizing generations really gets under my skin, because if you're going to talk about what a millennial stands for and what they want in their lives, I totally fit that. And I'm almost 50. I'm nowhere near millennial age, but I want my work to be meaningful. I want people to trust me and appreciate me and value me, and all those things that you hear about millennials. So when I saw the strengths, the whole reason I took the assessment was a friend of mine gave it to me as a gift, and he was one of my coaching clients. And he said, I just know this is going to be a tool you'll find useful. So I took the assessment and I read my results and I thought, yeah, that's right. It's accurate. Now what? And I didn't see the application in it. And I'm an activator as my number 2 strength. So if I don't see application in something I'm doing, I just don't do it. And it's easy for me to dismiss that kind of activity if it doesn't really make action, and apply. Exactly. What's next? And so I took the assessment, I read the results, I kind of dismissed it for a little while, and I came back to it. There was something about it that drew me back. And I realized that my friend, his name is Tom Dietzler, and I realized that if he gave me this tool and I respect and admire him, then there must be more to it. I must be missing something. And I went back to it. I started reading the book, the first part of the book, the StrengthsFinders 2.0, and realized that the whole concept of StrengthsFinders is different from the other assessment. And other assessments are great. You can use DISC, you can use real colors. Those are great assessments. Myers-Briggs is an interesting one. But if you don't take it beyond the assessment, if you don't go past the, oh, yes, this is accurate, and actually take it to the next step of talking to somebody about the results and how you can apply that learning, then you may as well not take it at all. And I had this awakening moment as I read about the whole idea of focusing on the complexities of our human brain and not simplifying it down to a color or a four-letter description of you. That's why I found it so interesting. So I'm curious about what your story was, how you decided to get into StrengthsFinders.
I found it in 1999. The book First Break All the Rules came out, and the title just appealed to me. And so that was Marcus Buckingham at the time, started doing some stuff on the speaking circuit related to strengths. And I took the assessment through that. And really what I was trying to do is I was a first-time manager, and I was trying to not be cruddy at the job. And
thank goodness.
And I had a couple of people on the team, one person in mind that I was concerned about and I thought might not make it. And the notion of firing somebody or being the person who would decide something so weighty in somebody's life without putting really good thought to it and making sure that that was the right decision was something I was taking very seriously. So I did this. I read this book. I did the assessment. I thought it was nicely insightful for me. But what it kept striking me was, man, this would be really good stuff to know about other people on the team because I could know where they're coming from. I could understand their headspace. So that was my first use and first attempt. It was just a really practical thing as a manager. And what I discovered surprised me so much because I found things in that person that I thought might not make it on the team that were totally the opposite of the way I think. And I realized that maybe I had some biases against those behaviors or those ways of thinking because it's not how I think, it's not how I like to think, and it actually makes me feel like I'm dragging down. And so in this case, it was consistency that I could probably attribute it to the most. Love standard operating procedures, love doing the same thing, knows what to expect. Meanwhile, I'm like, let's change. Here's the vision. Here's the next thing. Let's get excited about it. My positivity is trying to fire everybody up about it. And meanwhile, if you look at the other book that Gallup puts out, the strengths-based leadership book, they talk about hope, stability, compassion, and trust. Well, my talent themes are giving no stability to the team. They're change, vision, future, but they're not looking at current state, knowing what to expect, feeling like that steady, stable, loyal stuff was part of their life. So it gave me the self-awareness to say, oh, this is a totally different way of being. Not only am I not seeing that in her, I certainly wasn't seeing that as a virtue. And what could it look like if I did? And maybe there are some areas of stability and operations and procedures that are boring to me after they get off the ground that if delegated, we would both be in our sweet spots because I could get it started and she could keep it going. And it just opened up a whole new world of how to use talent, how to assign work, how to see value in other people, how to use the opposites that you find in people instead of headbutting each other to use it for good. So that was my introduction to StrengthsFinder.
So when did you had her take the assessment, right?
Whole team. Yep.
The whole team took the assessment. And when the results came back, how were they okay with taking the assessment, or were they like, oh, great, another flavor of the day from management?
It was no problem. So this was actually a situation where people were open to it. And I think also the kind of work, I've always been involved in either a learning and development department or an HR department or those kinds of things with a learning and development and marketing background. I don't know. All the teams I've been a part of, they've been open to this stuff. So I didn't have to overcome the skepticism of the tool.
It sounds like most of the agencies where you would be working would attract people who were learners to begin with. So even if they had discipline and deliberative in their top strengths, they probably also have learner or intellection, something where they want to learn more, even if they are not into activating on things. So would that be kind of a pattern that you would see?
That's a good question. I don't know. That has been so long now that I can't remember, because that was a small sample size. That would have been,
Mm-hmm.
like a team of 10 or less.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can tell you now where I see trends because I watch for it. But then because I was
Right.
applying it as a manager, I wasn't really watching for it. So I'm not sure if it
Right.
was or not. That makes it resonates with me. It makes sense,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't remember if that was the actual result or not.
Huh. So how long did you manage that team, and did you see this person thrive after you started working through this stuff?
Yeah. So that role was a couple of years. And yeah, absolutely. Everything changed. And what surprised me most of all is that this person had potential that I absolutely couldn't see beforehand. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, looking back, I'll say I wasn't willing to see it because I didn't know it was there and I wasn't trying to see it. I was getting the self-fulfilling prophecy, the things that I didn't like that I was seeing. I would just see that and it would blind me to all the other stuff. So,
Yes, which is totally common.
yeah. So totally. Yeah. This person was able to thrive and play that role on the team where imagine, you know, how people feel when they say, well, I'm the go-to for this. If I could say, I'm just going to make up the name Sue. And if I say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, Sue's the go-to, if you want to see the documentation on anything, or if you want to know the process or the procedure on anything, Sue has it documented. And if we don't have it documented, she would get fired up that a document needed to get created so we could have a standard operating procedure. And so just being that person, it made her feel valued and
Competent.
competent, yeah, and appreciated when
Mm-hmm.
otherwise we were all kind of like, come on, get with the times, get out of our way. Let's quit holding us back. You're
Right.
just always mopey like Eeyore over there telling us our ideas are too fast. And that
You're the
vibe,
no man, not the yes man.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So I'm just so curious. Was there a moment where you two had like a light bulb moment where you just went, oh, okay, this was right. I'm so glad we did this. And look at the results. Was it like one of those moments where you went to sleep one night and the light bulb went on? Or I know it's like a dimmer switch. It's not like a light bulb just goes on all of a sudden, but
Yeah.
was there a moment you remember?
I remember my experience of it was just light bulb enlightenment for the whole team. I remember thinking when I saw the results and then I thought of how they acted at work and how they did their jobs individually, it was like, oh, I just kind of thought, wow, this is
Yes.
telling me why. And it's describing motivators and needs and all of these layers of nuance that it made sense out of so many things that I didn't make sense of before. For her, I'm not sure what I imagine happened, what I remember, and what I think was really going on was more like um, I needed to rebuild trust, and it was a process over time. And it opened the door for that to happen, and I think it did. But I don't think that it was this instantaneous, oh, yeah, you're going to think I'm amazing and awesome all of a sudden, and this is going to be a
Right.
panacea, a perfect workplace all of a sudden. I don't think that was the reaction. I think that
Right.
there was hope and interest in it, but then it took time. And then over the course of months, people would realize, oh, this is real. We're getting work assigned this way, and I'm getting seen and
Mhm.
valued in a new way. So I imagine that was just a process.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. And I thought of an example of one of my first big team coaching experiences with a state agency here in Montana. And one of the employees was obviously one that was getting into some major trouble. She had like command and responsibility and belief and achiever, all the hard skills that are in the executing domain. And I asked her in our one-to-one, I said, what are the words people use to describe you that you like? And, in Strengths, we talk about the balcony words. And she was saying, I'm the go-to person. People describe me as a high achiever. I get things done. People know that they can count on me. I'm reliable. I said, okay, great. And I had some background on this, so it's not like I was asking these questions randomly. And I said, so what are some of the negative words people use to describe you? And she said, bossy, abrasive, a bully, aggressive. And I said, ouch. And she said, it's okay. I don't care what people think of me. And it took me a second to understand that and appreciate it, which I did, because people with those kinds of strengths are very clear in their motivation, and they have that core central value that you can't shake. So I'm glad that she doesn't care what people think. But in the same breath, I said, well, what's your goal for this group? Do you want to stay here? Do you want to grow? Do you want to be a manager someday? And she said, well, yeah, I want to be a manager. I'd make a really good manager. And I said, so if people are using the words bully and aggressive to describe you, how effective do you think you're going to be as a manager? Do you think people are going to want to follow you and do what you ask them to do if they're afraid of you and you make them uncomfortable? And that was a light bulb moment for both of us, because I could see her expression shift. And the reason this story popped into my head as you were telling your story was that I said, well, what do you think? And she said, I think I need to make some changes in how I present information and approach things. And I said, yeah, I think that would be a good start, ideas of how you could do that. And she said, but they're not going to believe it. They're not going to trust me. And exactly what you just said. I said, it's going to take time. You have this baggage now with them. They already have labels for you. So you're just going to have to consistently and intentionally shift, and gradually they'll see the difference. But hearing your story was like, oh my gosh, yeah, we had a light bulb moment, but the rest of the staff wasn't going to have that same light bulb moment. It was going to take some time for them to trust that she was genuine in making this shift.
Yeah. And she has to trust it. I mean, it sounds like light bulb moment happened, but this stuff is easy to grasp intellectually, but to decide you're going to take action and do the work on yourself to filter the way you're communicating and making decisions and interacting with people, that takes a lot of concerted effort. So even if she came to them and said, hey, this thing was a shifter for me and I'm going to change, even then, she's like, they're going to think something weird's going on. Well, yeah. Even if she says it, they have to go, okay, show me, because
exactly.
You have to show that you're actually committed to it. People care way more about the actions than the words.
Definitely.
That day.
Definitely. And I think that was the key in this situation, as it was for you with your staff, as you navigated being a new manager. You have to build it. And that's very cool. So the next question I wanted to ask you, something that I've been thinking about a lot, was when you took the assessment. This was a long time ago, so you may have forgotten some of this, but it's only been a year for me, so I'm still absorbing some of these lessons. Do you remember, after taking the assessment, wondering where certain things showed up, and then having an aha moment like weeks or months later where you went, oh, that's why woo is in there? Or for me, it was strategic. I was like, oh, I don't know why it says I'm strategic. I'm not strategic. And it took me about 3 months of working with the coach to go, oh, that is showing up every day in when I do this. So do you remember a moment like that?
Yeah, it's funny that you use strategic as your example. So that came out in the report as my number one. And that was the one for me. I read it and my reaction was a little more affirmative of it, where I went, yeah, that's totally me. But yeah, sure. And then I move on to the other ones where I'm like, oh yes, Positivity. Yeah, I like to have a fun-loving work environment, and that's really important to me to bring part of that vibe. And individualization. Yes, I'm utterly curious about what makes every person weird and unique, and how we can use those differences to be their differentiators. The other ones just resonated with me. Oh yeah, that's how I get to know people. That's what makes me curious about people. That's what helps me think this way. But strategic, I just read it and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. And it took a lot of time. I would say it was a couple of years of exploring it before I understood, oh, it's just baked into everything, I think. And it's so foundational, and it's the underlying way that I think and make decisions. It's what makes me a fast decision maker. It's what makes me not have buyer's remorse when I pick something, the path feels right. It's what makes me sort out options quickly. It's what helps me look into the future. It does all sorts of things, but it's very much the way I think and decide and relate to the world. And I just didn't realize it was all wrapped up into that thing. It's almost like the subtle, I don't know, like you don't taste flour in the cookie, but the flour's all over the cookie. It's that sort of thing.
Right. Right. I love that you just described it that way. You are speaking my language right now. I love that, because when I think of the number one strength, and mine is also strategic, my number one strength, and I didn't associate it the way that you just described it. And it just makes so much sense. But when I discovered it, the way that I described it was, it's that thing that you do so naturally that you can't imagine anyone else doesn't do that. That you can't imagine that this is something unique to you, or that you do so naturally that you just can't imagine other people don't think that way.
Yeah, that's a good way too. The other way now I describe it is, I'll describe that moment when you're driving somewhere, you're like 15 minutes away from your house, and you have that thought, oh, I think I forgot to put the garage door down. And then you're in your head like, oh, should I really go back and check? Did I do it? Did I not? Is the whole house wide open? I'm going to be late. And then you go back and everything's fine. It's locked up. Everything's closed. You just weren't really conscious about doing it because you do it so naturally, because it's not something you're consciously thinking of and processing while you do it. It's that. It's just in your actions, and it happens so subconsciously that you don't notice it until you try to notice it and spot it as a standout thing.
Yes. Yeah, like breathing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what was your moment when strategic showed up, when you went, oh my gosh, that's what that is?
I think that when I really started to own my strategic and understand it deeply, it was about 5 years ago when I decided to make my full-time business focus on StrengthsFinder. And because I'm hearing so many different nuances from people about how things show up on them, and then I'm hearing, of course, all of these other examples of how their minds work with other themes, I just went on a spotting quest where I'm like, where is this come out in me? And it's everything from, do I make the decision at 3 a.m. at the red light to go through it in the country when there's not a car around for the next 100 miles? Why am I stopping at this? It might lead me to those kind of decisions. It leads me to decide whether to take a detour in traffic or not. But it also makes me think of things like, when I create a product, can I make it evergreen so that this will be usable for the long term, so that it's efficient use of time? So I realized, oh, it makes me efficient. Oh, it makes me sort things out. Oh, it makes me look into the future. It lets me see steps, maybe downstream effects that happen 4, 5, 6 steps ahead. My mind just goes there instantly, whereas other people might look only 1 or 2 steps ahead. And so I get there quickly. I start seeing it in the way that I make buying decisions, whether it's a simple, small thing like a vacuum cleaner or a big thing like a car. So I think that's when it really started, is just that I decided, hey, if I'm going to live and breathe this, I need to own all of them fully and not have one that I'm like, yeah, maybe. So I just looked for it. on purpose for months, and I'm still doing it. I'm still spotting things all the time.
That makes sense. And I appreciate that you decided that it was an intentional thing. I'm going to find this because it has to be here. I believe that it's an accurate assessment. So it has to be here. And it has to be so foundational that I don't even notice it because it has to be here. And the reason I appreciate that is that I actually had a very specific aha moment when I realized when it showed up. And I haven't seen it in everything I do. My sister would say, oh yeah, everything you do is strategic. But I didn't see it that way. And I still kind of, like you said, I'm still kind of exploring that. My aha moment was when I was coming down the mountain from behind my house. I've been walking my dog on this mountain for months. And as I was coming down the mountain on my way back home, I realized that before I had even left the house, as I'm putting it's called yak tracks. They're these grippers on your shoes for icy walks. And I had to wear them all winter long because I live in Montana. So I was sitting down on my kitchen floor, putting on my yak tracks, thinking about putting on the leash for the dog. And I had the route planned out in my head before I even finished putting on my yak tracks. And I didn't even think about it. It just naturally came to me, this is the route I'm going to take. And as I'm walking down the mountain, I realized that was the case, that this was this natural foundational way that my brain works. And I realized that I was taking that route because I knew I wanted to go up, to go fast and go at a steep incline because I wanted to get my heart rate up and warm up because it was like 0 degrees outside. I knew I didn't want to take a steep decline because my knees were bothering me. I knew generally where the dog might poo and I didn't want to have to carry it in the bag later. And, so I had like all these, the potentials of where things were going to happen in my head. And so I knew which route to take in order to address all these little things. And then I started thinking about that. And I thought, oh my gosh, I do that in the car before I even put on my seatbelt. If I have 3 errands to run, I know how I'm going to get there. And I know why, because if I'm going to have frozen peas in the car and it's going to be 80 degrees, I want that to be my last stop. So what really triggered my aha moment was when I was sitting in the car, my husband was driving and we had 3 errands to run in town. And as we left the driveway, he turned left instead of right. And I got so annoyed. And I was like, why is he doing this? He's the smartest person I know. And now he's going to have to go left on the busiest street in town without a light. Like, why would he do that? And my brain just started going. And I asked him, I said, so where are we going first? He said, oh, I thought we'd go to Lowe's first. And all I could think was, and that's it? We have 3 errands to run, but you've only planned the first, that's as far as you've thought. And that's when it dawned on me that this was a unique way of thinking. And like I said, he's one of the smartest people. He is the smartest person I've met ever in my life. We've been married over 20 years. And he has deliberative in his strength. So when he thinks about the obstacles that I'm going to hit on whatever path I'm going to take, I listen to him now. And that's where our strengths are so complementary. But that was my aha. Oh, that's where strategic shows up.
Yeah, that's a great one. And I love what is interesting is when you really get into these and you can see how different strengths would create the same behavior. I think it's so fascinating because you could take the person that I was talking about earlier with the consistency theme, and you might say, well, she also knows exactly what route she's going to take while she's putting on her yak tracks because she takes the same route every single time. Because she thought about it carefully once, she figured out the route, and she does it every day, every time, the exact same way. So you both know the way you're going to go, but yours is a totally different reason for planning it out. The variety part of it's going to be totally different. The speed with which you're thinking of things is going to be different. It's so fascinating how the outcome can be the same. And to me, that just demonstrates this thing about strengths that is so cool. It's like they're your easy buttons to get to the outcome, but you can use a bunch of the talent themes to get to the same outcome.
Right. Like people like me who I don't have anything in the executing domain in my top 10 strengths. And for somebody who's self-employed, that could be really dangerous. But I do have activator and command and strategic. So that looks a lot like the behavior you would see in somebody that has a lot in the executing domain. So that is one of the most fascinating aspects. And so tell me what you say to people when I'm sure somebody, and maybe you have a very specific example in mind, where somebody was skeptical and said, this is just a label. And, it's like a horoscope. This could mean anything. You could read into it. Do you remember a specific example of that?
What I will say about that question is it is shockingly small, the number of people who are skeptical about it and make that a problem compared with when I did other assessments. There was a time in my career where I facilitated DISC, and it was just, every session, there was at least one person, the armed cross person, who's like, this stuff is stupid. You're putting me in a box. I don't really want to participate so that you can label me and pick which flavor is the good one to be on this team and which one is the bad one. I really don't get that reaction with StrengthsFinder. Now I have a lot of teams that will work, tech companies, engineers. And so they are skeptical, but I always find it is in a productive way. So I do get a lot of skepticism because you're going to have a lot of intellection and analytical and themes where people want to know, is this valid? Do I trust the tool? What's the design of the tool? But
good questions.
Yeah. I think they ask questions that to me indicate I'm open to this if you can show me this is a good tool, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So for me, strategically it is, if I know that audience, in our pre-work, I always give people a link. If you're an assessment skeptic in general, or if you want to know more about the validity of the tool or design of the tool, I send them the meta-analysis. If you want to go read a couple hundred pages on the design of the tool, do it. That makes you come feeling like, okay, this thing's legit, then great. I also make sure that I know my stuff, like that I know the stats and the research, and that if people ask questions, I don't give them a bumbling fool kind of answer in the room. But even the people who have the horoscope idea, if they do the full 34, it's really easy, because when you look at the bottom 5 for most people and talk about this kind of thinking, do you highly value this kind of thinking? Do you like spending time in that headspace? And then they're like, oh yeah, I guess those are someone's virtues, but that stuff doesn't sound fun at all. Then they don't look at it like a horoscope. They realize, oh yeah, that's stuff I don't really like doing or being, or it really sucks the life out of me to live there. So when they have the horoscope view, it's usually because they have the top 5 and they're like, well, all of these just say good things. So you could say these good things about any of us. But usually with a couple of examples, they get it, that, oh yeah, this is a really different way of seeing the world.
Yeah. I recently had a situation where a person actually told me in the workshop, well, I have to admit, I'm kind of skeptical. And my answer to that, first of all, is, okay, good. You should be, because you don't want to just accept something as truth without doing some research on it. And I said, but do you think that it's accurate as you read through these words and kind of the report? Do you think it's accurate? He said, well, yeah. And I said, did you ask somebody who's really close with you to read it and decide if it's accurate? He goes, no. And I said, well, I would recommend that you show it to your wife and see if she thinks it's accurate. And every time that's happened, they've said, oh yeah, she said it's really accurate. So, and then that's my next thing is, okay, if it's accurate, then we can find ways to apply what we've learned. But you have to acknowledge that it's accurate first.
Yeah. I think what I find way more often than tool skepticism is a reluctance to participate honestly. If it's in a team environment, if they don't have enough trust and they don't know how it's going to be used, let's say they've had a bad team culture in the past, and this is one of those retreats that you're doing because they're trying to get on the repair train. People are a little like, I don't know, how much self-awareness kind of stuff do you do out loud in front of other people if something could be used against you? So they're worried about where it might go, and they're thinking ahead about that. And then I also get a little resistance if someone has a theme and they say it's accurate, but I don't like it, or it's accurate, but I don't believe it's
Right.
valued in this culture or by my current manager, then they're reluctant to try to own it and invest in it if it's only going to double down on something that someone doesn't appreciate them about.
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking very specific instances that that's happened. Can you tell me about a specific experience like that?
Yeah, well, I had one recently where someone had the communication talent theme, and I have these physical materials that represent the talent themes, and one of them was communication, and she took it and separated it from the other ones, so there's a visual separation.
Oh,
And and she saw me seeing her do it, and I was like, hey, what's coming up for you with this one? And she said, I've been getting feedback for the last 3 years that I don't know when to stop talking in meetings. So this one, that's not one of my strengths. I'm just putting it over here. So
oh, that's so
like,
sad.
yeah, like clearly it's a weakness. And so, yes, it's true, but no, I'm not going to go embrace it as part of my awesomeness. So it's great though. When that comes up, it just opens the door about strengths on overuse, strengths when misapplied, strengths that are maybe raw for that environment or need to be dialed down for that environment. And then it just becomes a nuanced thing. You know, which one are you applying in which situation, to which degree? And then she could go on watch for that. So she was able to observe herself and think about all those kind of things. But then also you could say, well, if you are getting feedback, what we found in the room that day is she gets great feedback on her written communications, is a great like headline writer for subject lines and marketing materials. People really appreciated that about her. So there were other modes of communication that were very well received. It was just in meetings, you talk too much and you don't let other people have airtime. So there was this one situational thing that wasn't going well.
Oh, yeah.
And usually I can get people to see, oh, it's so much more motivating if you think, I'm going to work on myself and I'm always becoming something just a little bit better. It's so much more exciting to think there's a pattern in the way that I think or feel or act that is in my head all the time. And all I need to do is hone that in and refine it. Like that is so much more motivating than I've been told I have this weakness. I have no idea where to go get or access this part of me that doesn't exist, that's hard, that drains me, that sucks the life out of me. That's the kind of stuff that's kind of depressing to work on because you feel like, oh my gosh, just resisting what's hard all day, every day versus, hey, yeah, I'm all up in my head about this thing anyway. Now I'm just tweaking, crafting, testing. That's fun.
Huh, I never thought about it that way. So did she tell you, I mean, how did that relationship shift after you talked to her about communication? And did you maybe point out some of her other strengths that she could lean into in order to balance out the talking too much or?
Totally. And what ended up actually happening in this meeting specifically, because it was just a team meeting or a team event that I delivered where, I got to have this experience one time, but we didn't have the ongoing relationship. So I don't actually know the full after story, but what she committed to in the room was the concept of using your talent themes with a volume dial really resonated with her. And she said, all right, when I'm in meetings, I just need to tell my communication talent theme. It's up at 10, the cranked volume.
Right.
Instead of diming the amp all the way up to 10, I'm just going to turn it down to a 2 while I'm in meetings. I'm going to take a breath, take a beat before I talk. I'm going to make sure other people can go first. I'm going to think before I talk in this situation. But I'm also going to commit that I'm not going to squash this out in myself. Like I talked to her about the idea of if you lead through the communication talent theme, you likely would love to talk it out loud with somebody when you're working through a problem, those kinds of things. So if you tried to squash that part of you, that might be demoralizing. So she just really specified in on the meetings where she said, I'm just going to turn the volume down on meetings, but I'm going to let it be there for the other situations like it's been because it seems like it's working for me, except in meetings.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. And I hadn't used that idea, that kind of tool to dial it down. I've been focused more on saying, well, you also have learner in your top strength. So maybe if you focus on using your learner in those meetings where you're absorbing information, you're gaining information as opposed to sharing information.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I've been leaning. But I like that visual component of dialing down the volume, because I sing in a couple of bands. And so every once in a while I'm like, you're going to have to turn me down on this one. So
yeah,
that totally makes sense.
That's totally it. And it ends up being the same conversation that you're having anyway, I think, because when you turn that one down, then the next part of the conversation naturally is, which one could you turn up to serve? Just like you said, your learner might make you curious and ask the right question of someone, or it might make you patient enough to be a listener because you want to learn from what someone else is going to say. And it's just, hey, I'm just taking the learner from the 2 and I'm turning it up to a 5. Cool. You're a singer.
Or an 11. Yeah. You're in Spinal Tap. I'm turning it up to 11.
Exactly. Oh, we could totally nerd out on music. I'm a drummer singer, so we have a little thing in common that we could have fun nerding out on.
Oh, yes. And you know what I love about that aspect of being able to talk to somebody about it is the analogies that I use for when I talk to other musicians. One of my friends, Ranjith Abraham, he plays the drums also, keyboards. He plays keyboards, and he plays with a big church band in Pennsylvania. And I remember we did a podcast recording about using that analogy of listening better. He said his story was that he had in-ear monitors when he first started playing with this band, and he didn't make any adjustments. You know, you have this iPad where you can make adjustments so that you can hear the other members of the band, whether they're singing, drumming, guitar playing, or whatever. And when he got these in-ear monitors, he put them in, and the guy who was doing the sound said, "Do you want any adjustments?" And Ranjith was just being not complacent. He was being agreeable and didn't have him change anything. And for the first couple of rehearsals that he was playing with them, he wasn't hearing everything. And there was a point where right before his first actual production of being on stage with this band, he finally said, "Yeah, could you turn up the drum in my monitor and turn up the guitar a little bit, and then turn down my keys and my vocals a little bit?" And so he made these adjustments, and he said it made a huge difference in how he was performing in front of this audience, because he could hear better what the audience was hearing. And he felt like he was a better musician.
It's good. There are so many metaphors. Yeah, I use a couple of them in my virtual training, where I'll do some little things on a keyboard and use metaphors of talents working together, like their harmonies. And I mean, you can use the faders and a mixer, and there are all these metaphors. I try to make sure that I don't get technical so people go, "A what?" So volume dial seems to be a little more universal, where it would make sense, than a fader. But meanwhile, in my head, that's what I'm translating.
Right. Translating language. Yeah. Yes, definitely. So what other analogies have you used, or metaphors have you used with strengths? Anything related to music? Because I always use the Spinal Tap analogy for Maximizer, which, if our listeners haven't seen it, this is Spinal Tap is a mockumentary. So it's a pretend documentary of a pretend rock band. And there is a scene where the guitar player is talking about his custom amp that he had the dials go to 11. And the interviewer says, "Well, why didn't you just make 10 louder?" And the guy just kind of stops for a second. There's like a blank look on his face. And he says, "Well, my amp goes to 11. So I always talk about how that's the maximizer. That's the person who sees something on a scale of 1 to 10 as a 7 or an 8, but they want to make it an 11.
Man, I've never
other ones like
one. With my maximizer number 2, I can totally appreciate that one. I like to use the idea of, if you think of your talent themes, each item in your top 5, it's kind of like a note you have to play, but you can make so many different sounds. Just like at work, you can take the talent theme and it can come out. What you're applying it to can be so different depending on how you play it. You could play one note over and over again, ding, 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 and it would be annoying. You'd be overusing it.
Yes, like the communication in a meeting.
Yes, it's that example, but you could play it in harmony with another talent theme. You could put it in sequence and it starts to turn into something that sounds like a song. You can put it in combination with other people's notes, and you end up having a band, which makes a great metaphor for the team and the culture and the vibe. So I end up making it feel like that. And definitely I had a speech once where there was a piano in the room. I don't play piano, but I could use it as a tool. I know a couple of things on it. So I was able to just go over to the piano and do the metaphor live while I was describing.
Oh, I wish I had been there.
Oh, it was great.
Awesome.
They were like, oh. And being able to show how two themes together can be, they can feel like opposites or they can feel like dissonance in music. If you imagine like feeling, well, what is command going to butt heads with self-assurance because they both have the same thing going on? So you could use things where they might
consistency and adaptability.
Yeah. But then you could take those same two notes, and there's some song, I can't remember, but it came to me that day where it goes, da-na, da-na, da-na. Anyway, the same two notes are inside of that, and inside of that phrase, it sounds fine. Just like at work, those two themes in one situation, you're butting heads and you're driving each other crazy. But in another situation, you're like, oh God, I'm so glad you think of that because I don't want to spend my headspace there. So It's just really conscious and able to apply them and use them for good instead of evil, basically. Use them for good instead of for
yeah. So internally and externally, your own strengths in harmony and your strengths with somebody else's creating a harmony, some sort of harmonic tone. Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. I love it. I'm so glad you brought that up. I never would have thought of that. And that is definitely a great tool to help people, especially people who really love music, even if they're not musicians, that they're big fans. Because I think anytime you can add some sort of a metaphor, an analogy that people can really sink their teeth into. I like to use road trips as an analogy, driving in the car or whatever. And music and food are always things that people can relate to. So that is brilliant. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And music covers every culture. There's music. It may not sound like your music. And that one gets a little risky if you do global teams. What sounds like dissonance to us might sound good in another culture because that's a part of a pattern that people are used to as beautiful. But in general, people can, even if you think of concepts like genres, you can use the same notes to create a totally different feel. The same set of notes could have a soul song in one setting, and the next one it's jazz, and the next one it's rock, but they're the same
rap.
Just like, your same themes, they can be used in different genres, which could represent different functions. They could represent the parts of you that you show for a given situation. When I work with this project team, I bring this one out. But when I'm at home and I'm trying to be the fun mom of kids, which I actually am not, but the fun, that I'm not fun, but I don't have kids. But when you're trying to play that role, I'm trying to be the fun mom of kids over here. Okay, now I'm going to bring this other set out. So that's kind of like you showing up, playing different genres.
I think it also, if you think about it in those terms, you can also think about the fact that when you are going from point A to point B, there are multiple ways to get there. Totally. That you thinking that the only way to get from point A to point B is jazz, where somebody else says, well, I'm a soul and gospel fan, so this is how I'm going to get there.
Yeah.
And you're using the same notes.
Same notes.
Or maybe you're using totally different notes, but you're still going to get to the same end result.
And the best music metaphor that's just so simple is your strengths are basically a list of things that make you say, that's my jam. When I'm spending time,
yes,
that's my jam.
Right. Yeah. And it's your flow.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Especially if you think about when you're working out and you have a certain play mix in your head so that you can get to the right rhythm. So for instance, if I'm hiking there's a certain rhythm I want to be hearing while I'm hiking up the mountain versus down the mountain, because my heart rate is different. My footsteps are different. The way that I move is different going up from down. And so I switch music. I don't listen to the playlist going down that I listen to coming up. And
It's good.
When you think about it that way, you really, you're still using all of your strengths. You're just doing it differently. And you're adjusting, you're making those adjustments.
It's so good. Or you could even extend what you said to the what talent theme or what playlist are you on, depending on what vibe you want to create or the kind of contribution you're trying to offer. Just like if I wake up on a Sunday morning and I listen to James Taylor, that's different from when I'm hanging out on the patio listening to Black Sabbath because it's just what I like, or when I'm listening to Ray Wiley Hubbard because he's so good with lyrics and I just want to get into that creative, gritty space. They're all different and they're all enjoyable and they all sound absolutely not like each other, but they're all music, and it's just what playlist is getting used for what you're trying to contribute in that moment or who you're trying to. Yeah.
And that just reminded me of when somebody was saying to me, I was suggesting that you can adjust your language so that you're communicating better with people who speak a different language. And she said, well, if I'm changing my language for somebody else, then that's not authentic. And I said, well, my first example was, well, if you go to France and you try to speak French, even though it's not your language, are you being inauthentic? She said, well, no. I said, why not? She said, well, I'm trying to communicate. I need to get my needs met. I'm like, same thing. And so now when I think about that, just because I liked Caravan Palace last night to jam to while I was cooking dinner, and I listened to, I don't know, jazz, Ella Fitzgerald or Etta James in the morning because I needed to feel some sort of soulful creativity, I'm still authentic. I'm still me. Listening to different kinds of music doesn't make me less me.
Absolutely.
I'm going to have to dig into this. This is going to take a long time to process because this could go in so many different directions to help people understand their strengths and how they interact with each other. Being able to give them something to really think about in terms of applying what they know about themselves to improve their relationships.
It makes me think of the untapped potential that we all have inside of us. You know, we have so much to offer, every human. And then you take every human with all of this potential, but you imagine, what does the world know of us or see of us? It can be so small because they just have this one little experience with this one slice of us. And it reminds me of what you were describing with, you know, the day that you listen to Ella is so different from the day that you listen to someone else, but they're just parts of you. And deciding with your talent themes, which part of me, which note should I play, which talent theme should I use for this given situation? What could I do to amplify my contribution? Because you already have your default. Like you already know how you act in a given situation. You have a set of skills and knowledge and all of that stuff that you would already apply to it. And this is just, it adds the extra color to it. It allows you to make it better, color it with the thing that, that
is unique to you.
Yeah, unique to you and fits that thing. I was having a break in my thought there. I was like, oh, I'm going to take it back to a music metaphor again. But then I started thinking, no, your listeners are like, stop it, you two. Get off there.
You know what I think the word is that we're looking for here is intention. And I use that word a lot in my work. So I think what we're talking about really is when we choose which strength to dial up or dial down, being really intentional about it and saying, okay, so as an example, this woman with communication in her top strengths, let's say she has learner and input as well. So these are strengths that really collect information and want to learn and motivated by learning things, and choosing to say, I'm going to dial down my communication. I'm going to dial up my learner, my input so that I can collect more information so that I can communicate better in the future. I think it's all just a matter of choosing with intention. And every day we have opportunities to do that. What am I going to use today? And it doesn't make us less authentic if we're intentional about using them.
Yeah, absolutely. Just deciding. I mean, it's just like if you look at a brochure that somebody uses or an ad that somebody puts on social media or a resume that a career seeker publicizes, that just shows a piece of the product or a piece of the person. It's not all of the things, but it is the things that they think are serving the person who is reading it and will be most appealing to the person who is reading it. So I look at it like, if you use your strengths with intention in your work or in your work interactions, because you're allowing them to help you make your communication more palatable to somebody else, or make your message listenable to, or make your idea get heard because you're making a business case and you want somebody to actually consider it. All those things are just deciding with intention. Well, I'm going to lead with this one because I think this is the one that's going to resonate with this person, and the rest of it might just be noise, so I'll leave it out. It doesn't mean that it's inauthentic to leave it out. You just can't put it all in there.
Right. And the door that really opens is that as the person who is the audience, we have a responsibility to know that that's a snippet of that person. We have a responsibility to see it as, this is just one aspect of this person. And if I make a judgment about them, I'm limiting my opportunities to connect and learn from them, because I'm making this judgment based on this little snippet. Like what you said, and this takes us right back to that first story that you shared that I just loved, that you were seeing this woman with analytical and deliberative in her strengths and consistency in her strengths. You're seeing her as a foe. You were seeing this little snippet of who she was and making this decision that this is not going to work for you. And being able to see all the value that she brings as a result of these strengths, they're not weaknesses, as a result of having these strengths, what a compliment she can be to your team, and being open to that, to say, this is just a small slice of what I know about her.
Yeah. Yeah. The last thing I would even offer to bring this all back around to the first point and to your audience and your topic of the story that you tell, the story of your life, those kinds of concepts. If you take strengths and you use them to help you imagine, how do I want to show up in the world? How do I want to be seen in the world? What do I want my story to be when people look back on me and reflect on me? And if you use your strengths to inform the story that you're deciding you want to create, then it's accessible to you because it's your strengths. These are natural talents. They're going to be how you're thinking and feeling and acting anyway. And then they give you the intention thing so that you can show up in the meeting that you're about to go to, or in the conversation you're about to have, and decide, this is how I'm going to show up. I'm going to use these themes with intention right now because they reflect how I want to show up for this conversation. They reflect this best part of me that I could offer to this conversation.
Like a legacy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to use a current buzzword, personal brand. But that's what it is. In effect, it's your legacy, your reputation, the ideal of what you want people to know about you. And that's why I've coined that phrase, your strengths are your stories, because you tell the stories that define or describe those strengths. I don't tell somebody, oh, I have activator in my top 5 strengths if I'm just meeting them. I tell them a story about how I got somebody to go sing with me the national anthem at a baseball game. And
wow.
Because that's a story, and people relate to that. And if you can describe your strengths using the stories from your life, you just get another step up in that communication and opening people to know more about you than that little sliver that they might see.
Yeah. Good callback.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Lisa. This was eye-opening. I'm really excited to take some time now over the next few days and think about what we talked about, particularly the music analogies, and your story about being one of those managers that actually wanted to be a good manager and took those steps, because I'd like to applaud you for that. I know it was, what did you say, 1999 or something like that? I want to applaud you for being a manager that decided, that was intentional about being a good manager and recognizing the strengths of your employees and being able to create a cohesive, complementary team as a result of your intention to bring everyone with you. And I am just so grateful to have heard that story today, because it gives me hope. So,
Oh,
thank you.
Thank you. Those are really kind words. And I bet somebody will listen to this and decide, yeah, I want to create a different story, a different path about me and the life I'm living out. So I'm sure you'll inspire people to make some of those choices and intentions about themselves.
Gosh, I sure hope so. Because we need to start loving our jobs again. And that's all there is to it.
Yes.
Well, thank you for joining me, Lisa. And just so that our listeners know, I will have links to Lisa's LinkedIn profile so you can connect with her or follow her, even better, unless you
Not
find
connect.
something you must connect. Okay. And I'll have a link to her
I like new
website.
friends.
I know, that's right. The woo. Woo is my number 6. So I hear you. And just so our listeners know, the blog post associated with this podcast will have links to other parts of our podcast, like maybe a few links to songs or musicians that we mentioned throughout, just so that you can have some context for this conversation. Thank you again, Lisa, for joining me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. It was fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Stories Don't Define You, but How You Tell Them Will. Are you ready to explore your own stories to find your patterns and pivot points? You can do that with my new book, which is now available for pre-order. Your story isn't a timeline of experiences. Your story is each individual incident, conversation, and event that made an impact on how you think and how you see the world around you. This book will help you identify those incidents, helping you create a story portfolio to refer to as you choose which personal stories to tell and how to tell them. And when you can look back at that portfolio and find the patterns in your life, you can address many of the internal messages and communication challenges that are limiting your success at work and in your relationships. Visit my pre-order site on publishizer.com. Click on Proposals and search for Sarah Elkins or Your Stories Don't Define You. Please visit my website for more podcast episodes, blog posts, and information about how I can help you develop and share your stories at elkinsconsulting.com.
Listen to me, honey, while I say, how could you tell me that you're going away? Don't say